what a reputation she had. She was.
It has been a rough day for country music fans, certainly for those with a sense of history.
When he first met Billie and was dating her, and everybody would tell him, that
17 old country music deaths that Nashville never explained. You won't believe number 3. Country music prides itself on plain talk, but some stories were never told straight. Behind the rhinestones and radio hits are endings that feel like unfinished songs, the needle lifting before the last chorus. We are not here to wallow in sorrow. We are here to confront the moments that still nag at fans and insiders, the timelines that do not line up, the decisions that made sense until they did not, the rumors that survived official explanations. Each account arrives like a sudden chord change, abrupt, unforgettable, and leaving you with that odd little chill that says the story still has something it never got to say. The goal is not to prove a conspiracy or to rewrite a certificate. The goal is to admit that even in a town built on confessions and clear-eyed writing, some goodbyes stayed blurry, and the blur itself became the legend. Listen close, because the official line on paper is only one harmony. The other harmony, the one you feel, keeps humming no matter how many times the paperwork says, "Case closed." Hank Williams comes first because the road he took became the map for how legends exit. Found in the backseat of a Cadillac. Official heart failure. But the final hours and meds timeline still spark debate. Picture the South at the turn of 1953, sleet-glazing two-lane highways filling ruts with silver, the kind of night where truckers slow down and young men feel immortal anyway. A 17-year-old college kid named Charles Carr climbed behind the wheel to drive the most famous songwriter in America toward a gig that might have turned into a miracle or a mess. In Knoxville, a doctor eased hiccups and pain, hope and hazard mixing in a syringe while the clock kept moving. Back on the road, the landscape turned to a low, dark hum. A blanket covered a body already tired from everything that made the songs so true. By dawn, there was silence in the back seat and a question no coroner could answer. At what mile marker did a human being slip from touring pain into timeless myth? If you follow whispers instead of headlines, Tammy Wynette's chapter unspools in 2 voices. One official, one that won't sit down. Tammy Wynette, 1998. Cause shifted to cardiac arrhythmia after disputes and an exhumation. Questions about painkillers never fully faded. The First Lady of Country owned a voice that could hold raw ache without breaking, but her body paid invoices for decades. Procedures, flare-ups, and chronic pain that kept knocking. In the 90s, she kept moving, concerts, tapings, interviews, because the crown does not rest itself. When she died, the first statements were tidy. A heart that had done too much work for too long finally put down the load. Then came court fights, medical rethinks, and a change in the official line. Friends still argue over bottles, dosages, intentions, and what any of it proves. To many, she remains the queen who carried herself like a tower while the foundation creaked. A working woman doing what it took to keep going until the going ran out. Now number 3, String Bean and Estelle Ackerman, because this one lands like a trapdoor. String Bean and Estelle Ackerman, 1973. Grand Ole Opry home invasion double homicide that shook Nashville to its core, truly shocking. After an Opry show, Dave String Bean Ackerman, banjo picker, comedian, lanky as a fence post, and his wife came home to a quiet house that was not quiet at all. Rumors said he distrusted banks and kept cash tucked away. 2 cousins decided to turn gossip into a plan. They waited in the dark. The door opened. Shots cracked. In the morning, a friend arrived and found what no friend should see. Arrests and convictions brought legal closure, but the questions that matter do not live in a docket. Why them? Why that night? Why do we forget that fame mostly means being recognized on stage and left unguarded at home? The Opry still lowers its voice for this story, the crack it left in the foundation never quite sealed. Patsy Cline's ending is cleaner on paper and no easier on the heart. Patsy Cline, 1963. Plane down in bad weather. Pilot error on paper. but fans still analyze the decisions made that night. She finished a benefit show, hugged people who needed the comfort she carried in her voice, then boarded a small plane with friends to beat a long drive. The ceiling dropped. Instruments glowed cold. Pilots have a phrase for when night and cloud turn the world into a blank screen: spatial disorientation. To civilians, it means your senses go on the fritz while the gauges beg you to trust them. Somewhere between a last turn and a vanishing horizon, the needle stopped agreeing with the feeling in the seat of the pants. The report is neat and sad. The ache is a chorus that never resolves. People still drive to markers and stand very quiet. They do not come for answers. They come because silence is a kind of respect. Jim Reeves followed a year later as if the sky had not made its point. Jim Reeves, 1964, vanished in a storm. Wreckage found days later. Official findings exist, but contradictions keep the mystery alive. Gentleman Jim had a pilot's certificate and a steady hand, and he took the left seat often, trusting the gauges while a million fans trusted that velvet baritone. On an August day when rain thickened into a wall, a small craft tried to tiptoe home over trees and subdivisions. Radios chattered. Advice was given. Turns were tried. The cloud acted like a curtain that refused to lift, and somewhere behind it, control slipped. Searchers walked wet woods while radios kept spinning, "He'll have to go," like a stubborn prayer. When they found the plane, it offered the wrong kinds of clarity and none of the closure. Reports named weather and workload while stories kept adding tiny, unprovable frictions. Johnny Horton's tale adds a chill at the back of the neck because it seems to have rehearsed itself in his mind. Johnny Horton, 1960, head-on collision after he'd told friends he feared a drunk driver. The eerie premonition fueled legend. He talked about fate like a rude guest, warning that one night a wobbling pair of headlights would cross his line. He said he would aim for a ditch if trouble showed. He skipped certain events because a feeling tugged too hard. It reads like folklore until the night it reads like a police report. A show, a late drive, a bridge, another vehicle where it should not have been. The prediction became part of the myth, the way a chorus becomes the part everyone sings, and you cannot tell the story of the crash without telling the story of the warning. Graham Parsons closes the circle because his exit rewrote the rulebook. Graham Parsons, 1973, OD'd in Joshua Tree, then the infamous stolen body desert, cremation. Stranger than fiction. He had charm and a stubborn vision, marry steel guitar to rock drums and gospel ache and play it under a desert sky. The desert felt holy, high, dry, honest. So he went there to rest with friends. By the end, the mix of substances and stamina failed and the room went still. What came next would sound made up anywhere else. Friends commandeered the body, drove it into the park, doused a coffin with fuel, and tried to give him the send-off they swore he wanted under the stars. The law called it theft, fans called it devotion, tabloids called it everything except boring. The truth underneath is simple. Grief makes otherwise sensible people attempt wild gestures when they cannot bear a conventional goodbye. Keith Whitley brings the ache indoors into a quiet morning that looked ordinary until it wasn't. Keith Whitley, 1989, acute alcohol poisoning at home on an ordinary morning. The hour-by-hour timeline still haunts fans. He woke in his own bed, made calls, joked with friends, planned a day that would never arrive. And then the clock shifted from routine to tragedy without a warning siren. The talent was sky-high and the momentum real. The future had names, dates, and stages booked. What lingers is how normal the first hours were, and how suddenly the story flipped, a reminder that battles with the bottle do not always announce themselves with chaos first. Friends remember laughter on the phone, a coffee cup on the counter, a set list on the table. By the time anyone realized the danger had arrived, it had already done its work, leaving a clean house full of unanswered questions. The calendar stayed busy, the chair stayed empty. Don Rich teaches a different kind of what if. Don Rich, 1974. Buck Owens' right hand dies in a late-night motorcycle crash. Speed, lighting, and what-ifs linger. The Bakersfield sound had two voices that locked like gears, and one of them rode into the night and never came back. Lamps on back roads play tricks. Shadows collapse. Corners shorten with a snap. When a band loses its balancing beam, the music keeps going, but the center of gravity wobbles. People who heard that Telecaster still talk about how clean the line was, how a single note could cut dust out of a room. The crash turned that line into a question mark, and the Bakersfield myth learned what every myth eventually learns. Talent is not armor. The records remained bright, the road turned dim, and the what if he'd taken the truck instead refuses to stop asking itself. Dottie West puts the Opry in motion and then stops it cold. Dottie West, 1991, car crash en route to the Opry. The circumstances around the ride and injuries fueled years of questions. An iconic veteran running late, a helpful ride, a highway that refused to forgive a mistake. Suddenly, the night everyone expected to end in applause detoured into a hospital corridor. The songs always cast her as resilient, glamorous, unbreakable. The wreck reduced everything to bone and breath. Conversations afterward circled driver choice, speed, and the monsoon of chance that turns a short trip into a permanent detour. The Opry lights still glow, but for a long time they looked like candles. Fans still replay the final hours like a tape that might reveal a different outcome if they just listen one more time. But tapes do not bargain, and pavement does not apologize. Luther Perkins proves that hazard can live in a quiet room. Luther Perkins, 1968. Johnny Cash's guitarist lost in a house fire. A late-night cigarette remains the accepted but debated cause. A man nods off while a television murmurs. Somewhere a small orange point keeps its own counsel. By the time smoke writes its warning across the ceiling, the window for clean escape is already closing. The story says smolder and flame. The fans keep parsing tiny details. Ashtrays, draft, placement, as if one more precise noun could give the night back. The boom chicka boom carried on, but its heartbeat had changed. Fire investigators spoke their careful language. Friends heard only absence. In some houses, danger kicks the door. In this one, it whispered, and the whisper was enough. Red Sovine adds a heartbeat to the wheel and then takes it away. Red Sovine, 1980. Heart attack while driving led to a crash. The suddenness and scene details kept rumors spinning. The voice that narrated long-haul legends was at the wheel of an everyday errand when his body ran out of permission. Witness accounts do what witness accounts always do. Multiply, overlap, contradict, insist. Did the car drift or jump? Were there signs a minute before that meant nothing until they meant everything? Stories sprouted because the man who gave the CB radio a halo could not possibly fade in an ordinary intersection, and yet he did. The myth prefers a grand stage. The truth prefers Tuesdays. That is why this one still bothers people who never met him, but felt they had ridden shotgun for years. Jack Anglin makes the Patsy Cline story even harder to carry. Jack Anglin, 1963. Fatal crash while driving to Patsy Cline's funeral. An almost unbelievable twist to a tragic week. He dressed in grief, started the engine and aimed toward goodbye, and fate wrote a second line under a first line that was already too heavy. The human mind does not like coincidence of that size. It starts hunting for patterns, omens, sermons in the soot. There was no sermon, only the dizzying sense that sorrow sometimes calls for company, and the road obliged. Fans still speak his name softly when they speak hers, as if the two stories braided themselves without asking. The week felt cursed and the words stuck. Ricky Nelson widens the map, reminding country that its cousins carry mysteries too. Ricky Nelson, 1985, plane fire brought down the tour. Official report cites a heater, but myths refused to die. He bridged genres with a smile that sold itself and a band that could swing into a burn without breaking time. When the plane went down, explanations followed like buses: fuel, wiring, cabin gear, and the infamous heater that refused to leave the gossip pages. The simple truth is that fire turns engineers into poets and witnesses into choirs. Everyone points, everyone swears, and still the smoke draws its own conclusions. Families of the lost are left with paperwork that looks decisive and memories that are anything but, which is why the story keeps humming decades later. Hawkshaw Hawkins stands in the same shadow as Patsy, and the shadow still feels endless. Hawkshaw Hawkins, 1963. Another star lost in the Cline crash. The roster on that flight still stuns country historians. He was tall, confident, and steady on stage, and he boarded a small plane because schedules are cruel and roads are long. When pieces of wreckage turned up, they were tagged and filed, but you cannot file awe. People recite the names like a roll call at church, voices shaking on the last syllables. The lesson is not mystical. It is logistical and brutal. Weather does not care who is singing, and steel bends the same for legends and rookies. Cowboy Copas completes that brutal roll call. Cowboy Copas, 1963. Same doomed plane. Weather, weight, and experience remain the endlessly rehashed factors. Ask 10 pilots and you will get 10 variants on the same answer. A stack of minor decisions that turned major when a cloud bank said so. Ask 10 fans, and you will get 10 griefs that never learned to sit still. Copas had the kind of tone that makes a room stand up straight. The idea that a man that solid could vanish between takeoff and landing still feels like a borrowed nightmare. People still re-argue weight and balance charts like courtroom exhibits, as if arithmetic could send the clock back for one more safe approach. Lefty Frizzell turns the focus back to the body that carried the art. Lefty Frizzell, 1975. Stroke took him too soon. Not a mystery, but the abrupt end, after a hard-living decline, feels unfinished. He invented phrasing that modern singers still steal with pride, then spent years paying for appetites the road makes easy. When the stroke came, it cut a story in mid-sentence. There is no angle to argue, just a collective wish that the man who taught half the town how to lean on a word had been given another verse. The catalog still teaches, the silence still stings. In a lineup of mysteries, his chapter is the plainest, which somehow makes the ache sharper. Sometimes the hardest truth is the one with no riddle at all. If the pattern feels relentless, storm, road, smoke, shock, that is because the business teaches habits that dare fate to keep up. These are not only sad endings, they are unsolved feelings, questions that play on loop like a jukebox with a jammed button. One thread runs through every name here, an official line that tidies the paperwork and an unofficial harmony that refuses to quiet down. It hums when Hank's pallbearers remember the snow and the injections and the unguarded frailty of a genius who needed rest. It hums when Tammy's friends recall doctors, kindness, and a schedule built to be conquered. It hums in the whispered prayer outside Stringbean's door, in the hush at the edge of Patsy's path, in the wet woods where searchers called Jim's name, in the nervous smile of a man who kept talking about a drunk driver until prophecy sounded like routine, and in the dry heat over Joshua Tree where grief tried to prove a point with gasoline and stars. Add the quiet living room where Keith's clock ran down, the intersection where Red's story stopped mid-sentence, the back road that took Don, the highway that took Dottie, and the house where Luther's ember made its fatal vote. What keeps these stories alive is not tabloid appetite, it is community memory. Fans and families gather the scattered pieces and try to build an ending that feels worthy of the life, which is impossible, and also the only work worth doing after loss. Radio callers swap timelines. Roadies remember a joke told an hour before a goodbye. A pilot explains what cloud and darkness do to judgment. A nurse talks of medicine cabinets and good intentions. An archivist digs out accident reports. A grandchild finds a box of clippings. A neighbor leaves guitar picks at a roadside cross. People speak Jack's name when they speak Patsy's, and they say Hawkshaw and Copas in the same breath because that is how the week felt. They quote Lefty to comfort themselves and play Don's licks to remember how bright a Telecaster can be when the room is tired. They still argue Ricky's heater, Red's last mile, Dottie's ride, and the oldest arguments of all: weather, weight, timing, and the thin line between caution and courage. So let us play it straight. The lesson is not to fear the stage, it is to respect everything that surrounds it. Hire a driver when the road turns mean. Cancel when the ceiling sinks. File flight plans that make daylight your friend. Keep band families in the loop. Build margins into travel. Plan the long way home. Treat pain with patience instead of bravado. Rest like it is rehearsal. Let a show wait, because a life cannot. Managers can serve the music best by guarding the human being inside the brand. Friends can serve best by asking again how the morning feels, and then staying until the answer is honest. And for the fans who love hard, keep the pressure off the pedestal and put the care onto the person. That is not drama. It is maintenance of the miracle. The people on these records were not invincible, they were brilliant and breakable at the same time, and that combination needs shepherding, not superstition. So we leave the lights low and the jukebox loud and let these endings keep troubling the water. There is no grand unmasking, no hidden key, no final conference call from the truth. There are just pieces. A Cadillac idling, a queen's bedroom gone still, a farmhouse where laughter lived, a last flight punching into cloud, a search line in wet woods, a two-lane highway, a desert sky made for prayers. Country music cannot explain what Nashville never explained. It can only sing the ache back to us until the ache feels like company. On a night, company is enough, because company is how we promise to get everyone home the next time road looks long and the weather refuses to listen. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.